Hey, I'm Chiqui Linguine, a gut and hormone health coach, and today I want to talk about PCOS, what it is, how it's related to insulin resistance, and why eating a balanced diet can help you with your blood sugar and with your PCOS. PCOS, or polycystic ovarian syndrome, is a hormonal disorder that happens in women. And women that have this have insulin resistance, meaning that the cells in our bodies don't respond to the normal levels of insulin like others would. More insulin is produced in order to balance our blood sugar, making our ovaries make too much testosterone, which is what the imbalance of hormones is with women with PCOS. The more that PCOS is being studied, the more that we're understanding that the insulin resistance may be the root cause of what PCOS really is and why people are even getting diagnosed and having the symptoms of PCOS. It's not necessarily that our hormones get out of balance and then we get insulin resistance. It's more likely that we are having insulin resistance, making our hormones out of balance, giving us PCOS. This would have been really helpful if I would have learned this when I got diagnosed 11 years ago, but I had no idea, and I was just given birth control by my doctor. I had no idea that eating differently would not only help my symptoms, but honestly cure your PCOS potentially. Like I said, I was diagnosed 11 years ago and I was on birth control for 10 years. I decided to get off birth control a year ago and naturally balance my hormones and work on it. And in this past year, I have done a lot of different little things. I made a video last week about the 6 major tips that help me reduce or eliminate my PCOS. But today I'm really gonna focus on the diet portion for the blood sugar balance portion. So balancing your blood sugar is really gonna help you out if you have PCOS, because at the end of the day, it's an insulin resistance issue. So if you're learning to balance your blood sugar, making you not need to produce as much insulin to balance out your glucose levels, then you won't have as drastic symptoms. Blood sugar 101 basics. Blood sugar and glucose levels are both the same thing. They mean the same thing and they're used interchangeably. And insulin is the hormone that gets secreted in order to bring down the glucose levels. So glucose is anything and everything except for animal protein. So carbohydrates, any type of sweets and desserts, fruits, vegetables, legumes, beans, nuts, everything else is glucose. We need glucose in our body because it is the number one thing that feeds our cells. Glucose is good. The issue is when we're having glucose in excess. When we have too much glucose, insulin needs to be pumped out so that it can store it, because everything in our body needs to be done quickly, and we can't just have, glucose just sitting in our body without doing nothing. It needs to be either actively used, so that's why walking or doing some exercise after eating is great, because you're gonna literally use that glucose from that meal. But if you don't do that, then insulin gets pumped out and it stores it. It either stores it in our muscles, it stores it in our liver, or when it's done, when those are at capacity, it stores it as fat. So again, first we eat the glucose, and then it feeds our cells, it fuels our cells, and then the insulin comes in to get rid of all the excess glucose, and it goes to our muscles, to our liver, and then stored as fat. This is why we need to be eating protein-heavy meals, because again, protein is the only thing, animal protein is the only thing that is not glucose. So the whole point of all of this is to say that we need glucose. It feeds our cells and it's necessary. But when we eat too much, that's when we have the problem. So that's why eating a real big animal protein, at least 30 grams in every single meal, is so important. This is also why eating fiber is so important, because although fiber has glucose, again, all fruits and vegetables have glucose, and beans and legumes, all of that have glucose, but when we eat something with fiber, it slows down the absorption of the glucose. So when we eat the fiber, it actually goes into our stomach and forms like a mesh-like little barrier around our stomach, so that the sugar cells and the glucose don't go so rapidly into our bloodstream, causing the insulin to spike up and having to freak out and store it in our liver, in our muscles, and then as fat. This is why if you have PCOS, it is so important to be focusing on your diet because we already have high insulin resistance. We already are pumping out extra insulin than needed. So if we're pumping out extra insulin, then we're gonna have to be storing more and more fat. So with every single meal, if you're not balancing your blood sugar and you're not focusing on having a balanced meal, you're gonna be storing fat. And that's why has nothing, like losing weight has nothing to do with calories, but has everything to do with what you are eating. So I heard this on TikTok. I need to find the guy's name. I will put it in the description, but he said it like this. Calories is a unit of measurement, right? So just like when you are walking, if you walk 1 mile on a flat surface, it's the same mile, it's the same distance. But if you walk a mile uphill, it takes a lot more energy and it's a lot more difficult than the mile in flat surface. So that's the same thing with calories. All calories are created equally. They're all a unit of measurement. But 100 calories of bread is so much different than 100 calories of broccoli. This is why we need to be focusing on what we're eating, not necessarily the calories that we're eating. This is why, the processed foods of 100 calorie snacks or looking for things that are low in calories is not going to help you out if you have PCOS or if you're just trying to lose weight without PCOS. But specifically, I'm talking about people with PCOS because it is harder for us to lose weight, and it is because we have the insulin resistance working against us. But if you learn to work with it instead of fighting it, it's going to be so much easier. So again, we're not focusing on lowering our calories, on working out until we have, gone under the calories. I see a lot of people talk about that. The only way that you're going to lose weight is if you're putting out more energy than you're eating. I have to disagree. That, in my opinion, is just not the case. The only way to lose weight is to not store fat. And the only way to not store fat is to not have glucose spikes. With every glucose spike, you are storing fat. It's going to your muscles, it's going to your liver, and then it's getting stored as fat. So having a well-balanced meal is going to help you out in losing weight. You can have a meal the same amount of calories, and one can keep your levels balanced without storing fat, and the other can totally spike you up and store fat, even if they're both low in calories, or even if one is lower in calories. Let's say, for example, you were to have a piece of steak with some Brussels sprouts, some carrots, and an avocado. The carrots is gonna have your complex carbohydrates. There's a little bit of sugars in there. Brussels sprouts is great for fiber, so does carrots. And avocados are healthy fat. And then you've got your protein is your steak. That meal, I don't know, off the top of my head, let's say that meal is 300, 400 calories, right? You can now have that meal and it's going to keep you super balanced, super full and satiated for at least 5 hours, because it's not gonna give you a blood sugar spike and it's going to keep you satisfied. Now, we can take another meal. Let's say that we get those 100 calorie slices of bread, right? We get a 100 calorie slice of bread and we're gonna put a little bit of cheese and ham on it and a little bit of butter. We have the carbohydrates from the bread, we have some protein from the ham and some fats from the butter and the cheese. And it might be a way lower calorie meal because we're only using 100 calories of the bread, and then we have the ham and the cheese. Let's say that meal is like 200 calories. That meal is still going to spike your glucose levels more than the large plate of steak, Brussels, carrots, and avocado. So this meal is lower in calories, but it is going to spike your levels, it's going to make you secrete insulin, and it's gonna store fat. So all this to say, calories have nothing to do with the matter of losing weight, of trimming down. It's all about balancing your blood sugar. And balancing your blood sugar is going to help you lose weight, and it's going to help you reduce your symptoms of PCOS, because again, it is the root cause of your PCOS. Instead of just masking your symptoms with birth control or with makeup if you're having acne, or there's a whole mess of symptoms when it comes to PCOS. But for me specifically, what I have seen the most improvement in is my acne. I used to get really bad cystic acne on my chin and on my jawline, and they were like the big painful red ones. If you have PCOS, I'm sure that you have either experienced it or you kind of know what I'm talking about. But I used to put on masks and creams, and nothing I did would help me out. And that's because I wasn't getting to the root cause, and the root cause was the insulin resistance. It wasn't until I started eating better, and more than eating better, because I've always eaten healthy my entire life, but I never understood the balancing the blood sugar until about a year ago. So it wasn't until I started balancing my blood sugar that I saw a huge improvement in my face. And that's because instead of trying to fix it topically, and instead of trying to just mask the PCOS symptoms, I was getting to the root cause of it, and I was really stopping the symptoms from coming out in the first place. Another tip that I use all the time with blood sugar and balancing your insulin and your blood sugar levels is eating dessert after your meal. If you have insulin resistance and you have PCOS or blood sugar problems, it doesn't mean you could never eat sweets again. I love my sweets. I have a huge sweet tooth. It's just about when eating sweets is going to be better for your body. Eating dessert on an empty stomach is going to skyrocket your glucose levels. It's going to make you get all those crazy symptoms, and it's just going to keep your hormones out of balance. But if you were to eat your dessert, the same exact thing, right after a meal, it's so much better for you. It's not going to spike up your sugars as much because of what we're talking about, because of the animal protein that has no glucose, because of the fiber that made that mesh around your stomach. So I read a book called The Glucose Revolution by Jessie and Shape, and she says to picture your stomach and your digestive tract like a sink. So imagine the sink is here, you wash your hands, whatever here, and you have your pipe going down. Whatever you put in the sink first, it goes down into the pipe in that order. So if you were to first put in your fibers, make that mesh around so the sugars don't go into your bloodstream super quickly, then you put in the protein, and then you put in the healthy fats, and then you put in the carbs, whether that be your sweet carbs or your pastas, whatever, that comes last. So eating your bread, your pastas, and then your dessert last is going to make a huge difference because of the way that we digest. We digest kind of like one at a time. Everything that we put into our stomach goes in that order. And if we're having the fiber that slows down the digestion process, that slows down the absorption of the sugars, then we're not going to have that huge glucose spike. Even if we were to have the same sugary dessert right after our meal, then in the middle of the day, it makes a very big difference. Another tip is to have vinegar. Vinegar, there's studies that show that drinking vinegar up to 20 minutes before, during, or up to 20 minutes after a super carb heavy or sugary meal will help reduce your glucose spike by 30%. That's a huge percentage, and that is a super easy hack that I use when I know that I'm gonna just be carb heavy, if I'm going in on my pasta, because that is my go-to. If I go out to a restaurant, I just have some vinegar before heading out, and I make sure to eat a salad before. Whenever I go to a restaurant, I try to get that salad in before the appetizers or before the bread that they bring out at the beginning of the meal. Because again, if you have carbs first, if you have something sweet first, and it doesn't have to be sugar sweet, carbs turns into sugar in your body. So if you were to have that first, you're gonna get a huge glucose spike. And it only makes sense that the restaurants do this because if you have a big glucose spike, then that means that you have like your hunger cues get out of whack, and it means that you can eat more so that by the end of your meal you still kind of feel like you're hungry enough to order that dessert. So it's a great tactic that the restaurants use, not so great on our bodies. So make sure you order your salad first, or even ask them if they have vinegar, and throw it in a cup of water and chug down that water back. It's preferable that you drink it with a straw so it doesn't mess up your teeth, but for sure put it in water. I've seen people take it back as shots, and that's like, it's really acidic. It can damage your esophagus. So putting it in water, diluting it in 8 ounces of water is your best bet. But another great easy hack to lowering your glucose spikes. And then the last one that I'll talk about, which I kind of mentioned at the beginning, is walking after your meal. When we eat and we have all that glucose, again, we need our insulin to distribute it if we're not going to be using it. But if right after we eat, we go on a walk, we do some squats, we move around, then the glucose is actively being used. So instead of your insulin coming out and storing it in your muscles, storing it in your liver, and then storing it as fat, you're going to use it and you're going to burn it off immediately. So that's another great hack. I know that a lot of people are like, I can't just take a walk in the middle of the day. It's only 10 minutes. And if you can't do that, then lunge back to your office. If you can't do that, then wash the dishes. Move your body. Literally any type of movement is gonna help, because when you're moving your muscles, you need glucose to fuel it. So that is going to just help you out, and it's not gonna give you such a big glucose spike. And that is what I have for you today. I hope that kind of helps you understand what PCOS is, what the root cause of PCOS is, and how balancing your blood sugar will help you with your PCOS symptoms, will help you lose weight, and will help you just feel better overall. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. I have new content like this every Wednesday.